Open your fridge right now. There's a good chance there's a jar of mayo in there. There almost always is. It's the single best-selling condiment in America, and according to the market data firm Circana, cited directly by America's Test Kitchen, US shoppers spend more than $2 billion a year on it. One brand alone, Hellmann's, accounts for over 900 million of that number by itself. And here's the thing nobody really thinks about. Almost none of us ever compare it. You picked a jar once, years ago, probably because it's what your parents bought, and you've never questioned it since. It just sits there, trusted, untested. So a handful of professional food publications actually did the work you never did. America's Test Kitchen ran a full blind panel. Food Republic bought 9 brands and tasted every single one, side by side, unlabeled. The Takeout did their own version. Reader's Digest did another. Different testers, different methods, different days, and yet the same pattern kept showing up over and over again. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. In more than one of these tests, the most expensive jar on the shelf lost. Not to another premium brand, to the cheapest jar in the entire lineup. We'll come back to exactly how that happened, because once you understand why, you'll never look at a premium label the same way again. For now, let's go through what actually happened when someone opened all these jars and tasted them blind, starting with the ones that let people down. Whataburger Real Mayonnaise. Every taste test needs a bottom of the barrel, and in Food Republic's 9-brand lineup, this was it. Dead last. Whataburger's bottled mayo rides on the name of the restaurant chain, and that's exactly the problem. The tester, Christina Vanni, dipped every brand in plain fries to isolate flavor, and this one hit her immediately with a strong, specific onion and garlic taste baked directly into the jar. Great on a burger. Almost nowhere else. If you want garlic in your potato salad, you want to control how much. This jar decides for you, whether you asked for it or not. There's a price sting here too. At roughly 28 cents an ounce, you're paying a small premium for brand recognition on a product that's actually less flexible in your kitchen than a plain jar costs less than half as much. Here's what to actually do with that. Any mayo carrying a restaurant's name on the label is seasoned for that restaurant's menu, not for your fridge. Fine for a burger night, a poor everyday jar. Know the difference before you buy it. Kraft Real Mayo. This is where it gets interesting, because the testers didn't agree, and that disagreement tells you something useful. Food Republic's blind panel ranked Kraft second to last out of 9. Vanni picked up strong garlic and onion notes she wasn't expecting, and when she checked the label, there it was. Dried garlic, dried onion, mustard, paprika, all baked into what's supposed to be a neutral condiment. But America's Test Kitchen's separate panel came back with the opposite verdict. Their tasters liked that exact same seasoning, described it as umami-rich, and one taster even compared it to Caesar dressing. Kraft earned a recommended rating from that panel. Same jar. 2 completely different reactions. So which one is right? Both of them, honestly. And that's the real lesson. This isn't a neutral, blank slate mayo. It's a seasoned one. If you love a savory, garlicky mayo, this might be your favorite jar on the entire list. If you need something neutral for baking or a delicate sauce, it's the wrong pick entirely. Don't build a recipe around this jar assuming it tastes like nothing. It doesn't. Sir Kensington's Classic Mayonnaise. Here's where the science gets genuinely fascinating, because this is a real case study in what happens when a clean label claim collides with basic food chemistry. Sir Kensington's is the only major brand in America's Test Kitchen's lineup made with sunflower oil instead of soybean or canola. And it deliberately skips a common preservative called calcium disodium EDTA. Their blind panel picked up on it almost instantly. Tasters described an aftertaste they called acrid and artificial. According to ATK's own food science notes, that's not really an ingredient quality issue. It's oxidation. Oil that isn't stabilized starts turning faster, and a trained palate can taste it happening in real time. Meanwhile, Food Republic's tester loved this exact same jar. praised the tart, lemony flavor, called it sophisticated. The ingredient list backs that up. Real lemon juice, lemon oil, and citric acid, a more complex acid blend than almost anything else on the shelf. At roughly 65 cents an ounce, you're paying specialty prices either way. So here's the actual takeaway, and it applies to more than just this one brand. Buy the smaller jar, keep it cold, use it fast. Preservative-free mayo has a shorter real-world flavor window than the sell-by date on the label wants you to believe. Primal Kitchen Mayo. If you've ever stood in the condiment aisle and grabbed the priciest jar on the shelf, assuming the price tag was doing the work of guaranteeing quality, this next one is exactly why that instinct can fail you. Primal Kitchen is made with avocado oil, marketed hard at health-conscious shoppers, and it was, dollar for dollar, the single most expensive product in America's test kitchen's entire test. Over 90 cents an ounce. Nearly triple the cost of the top-rated jar in the same lineup. Tasters liked the texture, smooth, silky, but the flavor let them down. A strong, acidic vinegar aftertaste that testers described as oxidized, even chemical. The same story as before. Skip the preservative, and you're racing the clock before the oil turns. Remember that gap we mentioned at the start? The most expensive jar losing to the cheapest one? This is half of that story. Price told you nothing useful here. It told you the opposite of the truth. Spectrum organic mayonnaise with cage-free eggs. Here's the split verdict that ties this whole pattern together. Spectrum's mayo is honey-sweetened, built around expeller-pressed oil, and Food Republic's tester genuinely loved it. Called the texture velvety, appreciated the hint of sweetness in the background. America's Test Kitchens panel had almost the opposite reaction, describing it as overly tangy, rancid, greasy, especially once it hit a sandwich instead of being tasted plain off a spoon. Notice something. Spectrum. So Kensington's Primal Kitchen. 3 different brands, 3 different testers, and the exact same fingerprint showing up again and again. Every single Mayo America's Test Kitchens panel ranked as a top favorite contained that preservative, calcium disodium EDTA. Every one they ranked lowest did not. That is not a coincidence. Say it again, because it's the single most useful thing in this entire breakdown. It's not about clean versus processed. It's about shelf stability. Skip the stabilizer, and the oil starts to oxidize. And oxidized oil tastes exactly like what these testers kept describing. Chemical, rancid, off. If you buy a preservative-free mayo, check the date more carefully than you would with a normal jar, and don't let it sit open in the fridge for months. It's not going to warn you before the flavor turns. Chosen Foods, classic mayo. 1 more avocado oil, preservative-free jar, and 1 more case where healthier sounding quietly failed to translate into better tasting. Texturally, tasters liked it, smooth, creamy. Flavor-wise, it fell completely flat. It has noticeably lower sodium than every other brand in the test, and on a sandwich, testers described it as bland. No tang, no seasoning, nothing to hold on to. At roughly 75 cents an ounce, that's a lot of money for what one panel called a forgettable jar. If you genuinely need something low sodium for health reasons, this is a fair pick. If you're buying it because avocado oil sounds automatically better, know that in blind testing, it didn't hold up against the classics sitting 1 shelf over. Mike's Amazing Real Mayonnaise. This one started as a stadium condiment before it made its way onto grocery shelves, and America's Test Kitchen's verdict landed right in the middle. Recommended with reservations. Some tasters loved a thick, silky texture. Others called that exact same texture greasy, filmy. The lemon flavor came through sharp. Sharp enough that a few tasters read it as sweet, even though there's no added sugar anywhere on the label. Not a bad jar. An inconsistent one? The kind of product where your own mileage really will vary. Worth a small jar before you commit to a big one. Miracle Whip. Last one on the avoid list, and it earns its spot for a completely different reason. Legally, this isn't mayonnaise at all. under FDA regulations, Title 21, Section 169.14. Oh, if you want to look it up yourself, a product can only be labeled mayonnaise if it's at least 65% vegetable oil and contains egg yolk plus an acidifying ingredient. Miracle Whip has more water than oil, which is exactly why its fat content sits so much lower, and it carries added sugar that most real mayo brands don't have enough of to even register on a nutrition label. Reader's Digest and Taste of Home's testers described it as sweet, almost ketchup adjacent, with a texture they called gluey, sitting right next to brands that taste nothing like it, on the exact same shelf, wearing a very similar looking jar. None of that makes it bad. Plenty of people genuinely prefer it, and that's a real preference, not a mistake. But if a recipe specifically calls for mayonnaise, say, to hold a stable emulsion in a dressing, swapping in Miracle Whip is going to change the texture and the sweetness of what you end up eating. Know what's actually in the jar before you reach for it on autopilot. So here's that gap we opened at the start. Closed. In America's test kitchen's own lineup, the most expensive jar tested, over 90 cents an ounce, scored worse than the cheapest one at just 20 cents an ounce. Not a rounding error. Not one weird outlier. The same story showed up again in Food Republic's completely separate test, run by a completely different person, on a completely different day. Premium packaging and an organic label tell you what went into the jar. They tell you almost nothing about how it's actually going to taste in your mouth. Now, the three that earned it. Duke's Real Mayonnaise. If one brand shows up near the top of nearly every independent test out there, it's this one, and it's not close. America's Test Kitchen called it tangy, well-seasoned, and praised how it held its bright flavor, even mixed straight into a plain tomato sandwich. Food Republic ranked it 2nd out of 9, and called it, flat out, a high-end product wearing a completely practical price tag. The story behind the jar is real too. Duke's was created by Eugenia Duke in South Carolina, and the company still follows a recipe that traces back to 1917, over 100 years, unchanged in the ways that matter. Its tang comes from a blend of distilled and cider vinegar rather than lemon juice, which is exactly what gives it that distinctive southern edge. And at roughly 21 cents an ounce in America's Test Kitchen's pricing, it was one of the least expensive jars in the entire test, beating out Mayo's costing 4 times as much per ounce. Sometimes the cult following is right. Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise, best foods west of the Rockies, America's actual best-selling mayo, the one accounting for that $900 million chunk of the market we mentioned at the very start, turned out to be a genuine blind test favorite, not just a marketing success story. America's Test Kitchen's panel called it exceptionally well-balanced, the right amount of acidity, a light, fluffy texture that didn't feel heavy on the tongue. Worth being straight with you, though. Food Republic's tester ranked it lower, middle of the pack. Even a brand this broadly loved isn't going to win over every single palate. That's not a contradiction. That's just what happens when you actually test something instead of assuming. Hellmann's was invented in 1920 by Richard and Margaret Hellmann, and it's sold as Best Foods West of the Rockies. Same exact product, different name, purely because of a historical territory agreement between the two labels. At around 35 cents an ounce, it sits right in the middle of the pricing spectrum. Not the splurge, not the bargain bin either. Kewpie Mayonnaise. Here's the one that genuinely surprised more than one professional tester. Food Republic's blind ranking put Kewpie in first place, ahead of every American classic sitting on the same shelf. It's a Japanese brand, invented by Toichiro Nakashima nearly a century ago, and it's built differently from top to bottom. 4 egg yolks per bottle instead of whole eggs. A blend of distilled, rice, cider, and white balsamic vinegars instead of one single acid, which gives it a rounder, deeper tang than anything else in this entire list. America's Test Kitchen actually tested it separately from their main lineup, specifically because it's such a different product. The version imported from Japan contains MSG, The version made for US retailers uses yeast extract instead, per the company. Either way, tasters in both tests independently landed on the same word: depth. A rich, savoury undertone the American jars simply don't have. If you've never opened a bottle, it's genuinely worth the trip down the international aisle. Not to replace your everyday jar, but to taste what a completely different formula does. Stirred into egg salad, as a dip for something fried. You'll notice the difference in the first bite. So, the pattern laid all the way out. Preservatives aren't the villain here, not even close. Test after test, the jars without calcium disodium EDTA tasted worse, not better, because the oil oxidized faster and trained tasters could pick it up every single time. Clean label marketing doesn't automatically mean better flavor. Sometimes it just means a shorter shelf life nobody warned you about. Price tells you almost nothing on its own. The most expensive jar in the room lost to the cheapest one. Twice, in 2 separate tests, run by 2 separate people who'd never talked to each other. And the brand with the loudest cult following, Duke's, earned that reputation in blind testing too, not just through decades of regional loyalty. Every once in a while, the hype turns out to be exactly right. If you want one reliable everyday jar, Hellmann's and Duke's both have the blind test results to back them up, not just brand recognition and nostalgia. If you want to try something genuinely different, Kewpie is worth the detour down an aisle you probably walk past every week. And the next time you're tempted by a premium, clean, oil-forward brand because the label says organic or health-conscious, just remember what you're actually trading for that price: a shorter, usable window. And, in more than one blind test, a flavor test is described as off, not elevated. Small jar. Big difference once you actually know what you're looking at. That's the mayo aisle, fully mapped. If you want more breakdowns exactly like this one, real taste tests, real pricing, nothing invented, there's a lot more sitting in your fridge worth double-checking before you buy it again out of habit.